It is critical for quality and validation professionals to stay on the pulse of emerging policies and regulations. From the FDA's Computer Software Assurance Draft to the newly released EU Medical Device General Safety and Performance Guidance, evolving regulations are a constant. Our network of professionals cover these topics and more in print, in person, and online, bringing the latest industry news and tools to our audience of hardworking experts just like you. The IVT Network gives you the tools you need to succeed in your profession, providing innovative content, industry research, lifelong learning, and opportunities for networking on a global level. For our listeners, receive 15 months for the price of 12 plus an exclusive discount with your new subscription. Subscribe today with IVT Network, the best decision you'll make all year for your life sciences career.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. We are excited to bring you ideas and concepts discussed at a recent panel presentation from the Computer Systems Validation Week conference, with some thought-provoking questions and reactive commentary from an industry expert, Steve Thompson. Steve, so great for you to be with us today.
Good to be here as well. Again,
yeah, I
always
really
good.
Appreciate you taking the time to do this and share your insights with us.
No.
So the recent session, Digital Transformation, which was part of the conference, allowed us to explore organization-wide digital transformation initiatives, share firsthand experiences of point solutions and platform transitions, as well as lessons learned from migration to cloud computing and cloud-first approaches. And our panel was made up of experts from leading digital-first companies both inside and outside the pharma industry. So let's review the first clip.
When we talk about digital transformation, I've seen three terms being somewhat used interchangeably. And I believe there is some consensus in how those three definitions are disparate terms. The first one being digitization, the second being digitalization, and the last one is the one we're most familiar with, which is the digital transformation. And the distinction is somewhat as below. Digitization is taking your information that's analog and converting it into digital, such as electronic records, such as taking your paper records and converting them into electronic records. Digitalization is more of doing things better, faster, cheaper. It's more of an incremental benefits, but you're not necessarily disrupting and transforming. It's the third piece, the digital transformation, that does all of that. And there are three things that they try to do, areas, which would be user experience, operational processes, and culture. And if I had to pick one of the three, it would be the culture that is probably the most challenging.
Culture, systems, and processes for controls across the organization are all important aspects of digital transformation. We hear the panelists point to culture as the most challenging. Steve, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, so it is the most difficult thing to change is culture, and it's the way we think we are, the way we act, our value system, and it could be different based upon the culture that we grew up in or the company that we work for. And so
Sure.
It's very difficult to change a company culture. And what's interesting about the word itself, I was originally thinking it was culture, like a cult,
Yeah.
but actually the origins of the word is to cultivate, to grow.
Yes.
And that's what it takes. It takes planting the seeds and then growing it. And it's something that happens over time. And I could provide you some links to some interesting things about what it takes is a movement to make a cultural change. And Dr. Reddy's, this pharmaceutical company, been around for a long time in India. They have an example of how they did it. And you don't just create banners and posters and wear hats and everything. That comes later.
Right.
But what you do is you start slowly introducing the ideas. And what the CEO there did was first have the leadership start to apply it in their goals and objectives. And then they brought it to more to the internal people. And then they had the people try to align with their motto, which was get well quick or something like that. And so they said, how does your job help everybody get well quick? And I'm saying that wrong. But anyway, everybody talked to it and it changed the culture and everybody bought in. So the point there is culture, yes, is very difficult to change. And especially when we introduce technology, because not are you only changing the way I think and believe, you're changing the way I do my job. And there's fear that by the change, I may be out of a job. It's going to replace me, which I haven't really seen it do. It always creates more opportunities. But yeah, so culture is very difficult to change.
Absolutely. Thank you. I definitely would agree. And it's one of those things that I'm glad you mentioned leadership, because it does have to be modeled from the top down. And everyone has to buy in ultimately to have a true shift in your overall culture.
Right.
I think this is a function of leadership and organizational will. I think this type of transformation is so fundamental to the business that's undertaking it, and it's a multi-year commitment, and it everyone's got to be behind it, and you have to really align your organization's objectives behind it. Obviously, the challenges are clear in the data and legacy technologies, but I think that the opportunity is if you can shift to an environment where you have real-time data, where you have flexible infrastructure and flexible deployment mechanisms for your software, then you're able to serve your customers, internal and external, in ways that I think were unimaginable before. So the transition that Capital One is going through, and that other companies that are embracing this, is truly fundamental, and you kind of end up operating like the FANG companies often do, and the pace at which change is being adopted. Within, in our cases, a clear regulatory and compliance framework. That's such a huge opportunity for all of our businesses.
Yep.
In this last clip that we just heard, the reference a multi-year commitment supported by leadership. Speaking of leadership, what are your thoughts on shifting environments and building culture while staying compliant with regulatory expectations?
All right. So when it comes to environments, I think of two different things. My background in technology, I think of technology environments, but there's also the environment that we work in. Both have to change, right?
Right.
So we have to change the way our business operates and everything, and we also have to change our technological infrastructure, right? So those things take time, and yes, it is a multi-year commitment to do that. And then the regulatory expectations is very interesting. So I've been in the industry for a while, and I've worked in different capacities as an auditor, as a consultant, and then for big companies. And when I first started, I thought it was black and white. These are the regulations because they're law and they're black and white, and you must follow them, which you have to adhere to regulation. But over time, you learn regulations can be interpreted differently. They're vague, and some say intentionally so. They're written vague, so companies reinterpret it and say what the policy and procedure is in order to adhere to the regulation. And we get stuck in these belief systems that this is the way it has to be, everybody's doing it this way, and you go to another company and it's different. So when you think about regulatory expectations and you bring in generally accepted industry standard practices, which people will say that we have to do it because it's a generally accepted industry standard practice, but that's generally accepted. It doesn't mean absolutely and completely. So when you're doing this change, you have to really think, is your interpretation, is your application of the regulation correct?
Right. And is it correct for you as an organization, right? Not just in theory, but does it actually apply and help you meet your end goal, right? Because it comes down to intent as well.
Ultimately, the company is responsible.
Right.
So how they interpret it, the FDA isn't giving you policies and procedures and say you must follow them.
Exactly.
They say these are the regulations, and you have to incorporate those in your policies and procedures. So I guess the question is, are your policies and procedures correct? And those will change. When you introduce technology, you're introducing technical controls, which can take care of a lot of the controls you tried to put in your policies and procedures in the first place. So you are changing your environment. You're bringing in technology controls, quality by design, all that other stuff, and changing the way your hard copy procedural system is. So yeah, it is a big cultural shift. It's a policy shift, and you obviously have to comply, but understand that it's your interpretation of the regulation on how you comply. And they'll inspect you to see if you're right or not.
Exactly. Thanks, Steve. Let's take a listen to this next clip.
In a regulated industry or in the business that we find ourselves in, I think for leadership, usually the biggest challenge when you're talking about opportunities with digital transformation is usually the question is like, how am I going to validate this? Mm-hmm. And how much is it going to cost to do it? And I think for this regulated environment is sometimes that the challenge is that regulators or regulations don't keep pace with the advancements in technology. But I think also there is the human component to that, which is we sometimes have a one size fits all. And so we have a rinse and repeat formula that has worked in the past for things that we have done in the past, but it sometimes is not what we need to move forward. So again, just because we have applied certain methodologies before, it may not work with the innovation. So it does require us to take a step back and apply critical thinking, and perhaps creating new strategies that will deliver a quality product or service, or to allow us to use digital transformation in the life sciences business. But it probably is not going to be done the way we have done things in the past. So it will take some creativity, and it will also take some thinking outside of the box, but trying to keep pace with the technology. So I think that is, for me, is I always see as one of the challenges is trying to move away from things that have worked in the past, but it just doesn't keep pace with the technology of today.
So assuming leadership and culture, how can we narrow the gap between regulatory and keeping pace with technology?
The FDA has been really good. You meet them at conferences, and I think that there's a mind shift, right? There's a big fear. It's the FDA. Don't say hi to them because they'll know us and we're on the radar and they'll come and inspect us, right? But my experience at meeting them at conferences and talking, that they're very open, and you don't get penalized for doing that. And especially now with technology, I've been in two scenarios where we've gone to them with technology innovation, and they were willing to listen and talk about it, and there were no negative repercussions, and they're actually encouraging that. So it's basically becoming more of a partnership between industry and regulators, and there was a third component, but I forget what it is, but all three working together, right? More of a partnership to help everybody. And that's what we have to do to move forward and adopt the technologies.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the regulators really want to see organizations succeed, right? They want them to be able to produce the highest quality products. They're not trying to trip people up. They're just trying to make sure that what is being put out there on the market is safe for patients 100% or as close to 100% of the time as possible, right?
Right.
With that in mind, what strategies do you see as integral to advancing technologies in delivering
We hear a lot more about cloud-first strategies. You'll see a lot of big companies are adopting that. That's a technology strategy, cloud first, and so that is important. But there's a fear of that, right? There's a feeling that if I have my server locked in a room inside of my company, then I am safe and secure. And that's not the case. If you're plugged into the internet, then you're vulnerable. Let's face it. We just had a pipeline issue here in the United States that was hacked, right? And that's pretty secure. So we all have to be careful, and we have to have those measures in place. So there is a strategy of, there are benefits on going to the cloud actually, and become familiar with that and the advantages of it, but also make sure that you have a security policy in place as well to protect. Data is one of the company's most valuable assets. So you have to protect that. And then there's a strategy on how is the organization going to change its culture to adapt to this new way of doing things. And then there has to be a strategy, how are we going to change the quality system? So a quality system is people, process, and technology. So the strategy should address the technology, should address the people, and should address the process.
Very good. We hear a lot in our industry, Steve, that we're slow to embrace technology. You know, some companies obviously are very good at this, others not as much. But in your opinion, can we in this industry keep pace with technology?
No, and no industry can. It's impossible. So yeah. There's a saying, if you could buy it, it's outdated. And it's kind of true. So I was kind of dramatic in that, but it's actually true. You know, I mean, if you have an iPhone right now, they're already coming out with a new one. So that's everything is constantly changing. So you have to understand technology is advancing exponentially and has been for decades. And that's a good thing. And just be willing to accept the fact you're not going to buy the new technology gadget and it's going to solve your problems and never change again. Everything is always changing. So can we keep up with technology? No, it's moving too fast, right? So is science. Science is, I mean, the audience is mostly scientists, and it moves faster than ethics, right?
Right.
Same thing. But that doesn't mean fear it. You have to embrace it because your competition is, the regulators are, and if you don't keep pace with the technology, you will be outpaced. You'll be out of the race, basically. Race to compete, race to find the cures, whatever it is.
Sure. And hopefully we can keep pace with some of the other industries that are embracing technology a little more quickly than we are.
And there are, like, if you look at our industry, life sciences, we are the slowest to embrace technology.
Exactly. Yeah, we definitely are.
Yeah, the fastest is the finance and automotive, you know?
Right.
So if they can do it, why can't we? Are they ahead of technology? No. Can they keep up? They have to constantly change to keep their systems secure and up to date as well. But why can't we be more like those industries? We should be.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully we will start to move in that direction. In this next clip, we hear more about leadership, the role of leadership, and the involvement of the team.
I look at challenges and opportunities as sort of two sides of the same coin. And I think digital leadership is very important for in times like this, especially where we are in a time of uncertainty. It's extremely important to have that leader who is a visionary and who is able to make a very compelling case and to be honest and transparent about challenge, look at challenge as an opportunity. And that becomes very, very important because all of you have mentioned how culture has been significant, critical in the success of digital transformation. So it starts, I think, with that leader where they are able to take this idea of the digital transformation and make it a digital transformation, because there's no one secret single formula and say, here's the road blueprint, go make it happen. That ain't there. I sort of like to use this analogy of a Christmas tree. So what is the Christmas tree? and it can mean so many different things depending on what your home is. Most importantly, it's very important your family members are bought into it, and it's going to bring in the festive mood, and everybody rallies around it, and it's the kind of meaning it's providing you. If you're able to bring that kind of a spirit to an organization and stress on skills, stress on leadership, and have a long-term game, and communicate that compelling reason again, that's when the real change happens, because real change happens from the people, not from the business processes, not from the technology. Those are enablers to this business outcome that you envision, and you get the entire organization to rally behind.
So digital leadership is very important to an organization embarking on digital transformation activities. Challenges and opportunities around digital transformation are many, of course. What role should leadership play in navigating these challenges and opportunities, in your opinion?
So digital leadership is very interesting because I've been in tech for a long time, so I guess I'm kind of fortunate, but maybe my generation or era or those older than me, it hasn't been a tool. I was amazed when the word processor came out and you could actually spell check, right?
I know.
And that was unbelievable what it could do. And look at where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And so digital leadership, I think the younger generations are used to it. And so leadership is a lot about listening too, right? Listening, and your workforce coming in is younger and they're familiar with technologies and they expect those tools in order to be happy to work.
Yeah, I was going to say, they're not just familiar, they expect them, right? That's
yeah.
Yeah.
And the companies, again, keeping up with technology, you can't, but how are you going to bring in the workforce if you have antiquated systems? It's not going to happen, right? So
it's true.
So leadership has to understand that they have the experience and years and years, and they understand the regulations and the domain expertise, but you could leverage the power and experience of the new generation coming in that understands digital probably better than all of us do. So it's not like you're up at the top and you're going to make all of these decisions. It's, again, working together, which, by the way, again, back to the culture, part of the culture is leadership, but it also from the top down, but it also comes from the ground up. You have to work both angles.
Yeah, I was just going to add that little caveat on there and ask you what you thought since you obviously relayed exactly what you think leadership responsibilities are, what do you think the role is or the involvement should be from the team, right? Because and how is that impacting culture? Because we are all responsible for building and maintaining that culture. So where does the team fit in here?
Very important, and I'll so the leaders that are in the places of power have been doing it, so they have the knowledge, the expertise, the domain expertise, so they can learn from those that are more digitally savvy, let's say. But I can remember when I got out of college, I got my degree. I knew everything. I am ready to go, right?
Yeah.
And I had no industry experience. And over the course of time, you make mistakes, bumps in the road, you fall down, you get up, and that's experience. So
much more valuable learning. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a lesson to the younger generation as well. You don't have all the answers and you don't believe us now, but you'll understand when you get to our age eventually. Yes. It's like true. We mimic our parents, right?
That's so true. Oh my God.
So working together, everybody working together and finding out, the ideas, bouncing off ideas. There should be safety. There's a safe haven where people could bounce these things off. That's important to a cultural change, because if you're not safe, and you're risk avert, you won't accept any risks, you're not going to change. Right. But if you create the space where everybody could come together and throw out ideas and exchange and learn from each other, that's working together, and that will change your culture and help you advance as well.
It's a great point, Steve. Thank you. In this next clip, we're going to hear more about regulatory requirements.
I think in some cases, regulators need to give permission, essentially, to adopt new technologies. Essentially, signaling, saying, "Hey, like we do want you to being the industry to innovate and use technology." And I know, like, at least like on the FDA side, there is a lot of signaling of that with some of the FDA's initiatives. And the other part of it is, again, there is a need for perhaps some more global harmonization. It seems like every health authority around the world is issuing separate guidance and regulation around things such as like cybersecurity and privacy and software as a medical device and digital health and data integrity. So we get inundated with all of those, but they don't always speak the same language. So for a global business, like the case of Johnson & Johnson is, it is hard to operate if you have to have a different set of rules for every market that you're in. And I think maybe another part to the question is industry, particularly like folks like myself in quality and compliance. We definitely have to apply critical thinking and also to use technology. Like some of the things that we like regulations that we have today, they have not been revised since 1976. Well, a lot of things have changed since then. So I think we need to use current thinking and things that are available to us today and critical thinking, because, yeah, again, in some cases, you don't need the regulations to change. You essentially, the principles are still there, which is you want to show that you're, at the end of the day, you're delivering a product that meets its intended use. It is of good quality. And in some cases, again, being regulated also meets whatever the regulation calls for. So I think sometimes we just get tangled in our own things that we have created over time. And we need to take a step back and maybe like clear some things out and again, apply critical thinking and then move forward.
So, Steve, being a digital transformation leader, you have navigated some of the regulatory expectations. What important takeaways can you share?
Well, now it's great because technology is being embraced more. I can remember in '97 when Part 11 came out and we were talking about electronic records and electronic signatures. By the way, the regulation still hasn't changed. So That's a long time ago. And so regulations move slow, but technology moves fast. The good thing is that not only is technology being embraced more by regulators, it's being expected. You have to. And for example, submission of documents, you don't send them semis full of paper anymore. You do electronic submissions because you could do more with it, statistically analyze it, all of that stuff. So they're moving forward with that as well, and they're accepting the technology applications. And something very interesting is happening too. It happened in Europe with the MHRA wanting unfettered access to systems. So not only do they like technology, they want their hands on the technology when they're doing inspections, and that's coming our way too here and domestically. So
yeah, and there's good and bad in that, I would assume, at least from the perspective of the organization, right? So do you feel they mentioned here that there's maybe these myths, underlying myths, regulatory myths within our industry? How do you feel about that? And if you think they exist, if you agree with the panelists here, what can we do about that?
Yeah, excellent point. And I'm glad that the panelists brought that out because, and so everything I'm saying, I should have had the disclaimer that it's just my opinions and not necessarily the company I work for. So with that being said, I will throw out, there are a lot of myths in my opinion. And the myths come with the interpretation of the regulation, which we were talking about earlier, right? So I'll give you an example. Some on validation will say that you must only use a blue pen. Some will say you can use a blue and a black pen, right? Some will say that you cannot use the letter Y or N for yes or no, or P or F for pass or fail. You must spell it out. So that's a very simple example. and that is a requirement. They are not going to change unless you change the culture, right?
Right.
So that's a very simple thing about how we interpret the regulations, right? So the regulation, when it comes to validation, says computer systems must be validated, right? You must have systems with procedures. That's in general. And so now we're left open to what we can do. And that's where we got to be careful. Is it really our opinion? Is it really a myth that we believe? Or is it something that is really good, as you said, for patient safety and quality, which is ultimately what we're going after? So I think there are myths and core beliefs that we've held true, probably because that's the way we were trained when we were coming into the industry and we think it's true. But if you go around, if you're a consultant, if you work with different companies, you'll see that there's many ways to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes that is exactly like you said, that is part of the culture, right? We grew up or matured in the organization that we're in or in the industry that we're in. And we've just always done it this way. It's how we were taught, it's how we do it. It's how we're teaching others to do it. And so it must be true.
Right.
And sometimes that's the case and sometimes it isn't, right? That's just one way of thinking or one set of processes, but it's not necessarily the guidelines.
Right.
Yeah. This next clip has talks about a lot of different concepts that I want to get your thoughts on. But first, the clip.
It's all coming down to critical thinking. Application of critical thinking is really key and central to everything. Besides these explicitly written, worded regulation that you are alluding to, Dan, that some organizations want to see. Because the expectation is, I think, from the FDA, again, like Ron was saying, two things. Patient safety, it's safe. Product quality. More documentation does not translate into more quality. More testing does. So keep that as your guiding compass. And the second thing, how do I know how much testing is good? What do I need to test? Apply critical thinking. So that's, I think, where we need to focus on. And there was the report that came out last year, the digital business report from MIT, Sloan, and Deloitte, where they said digitally mature organizations do three things well: digital leadership, digital skills for their employees, and lastly, a culture of risk taking, right? So, and that's where the regulatory comes into play. And that's where people are saying, okay, if I want a culture of risk taking, how are the regulatory agencies going to foster that without inhibiting it? So on the one hand, the FDA is saying we want to see more adoption of technologies, emerging technologies, because in the end, we want good quality products to be out there for our patients so they can lead a healthy life. But you can't do that by holding them back and burdening them. So that's one. And I'll close with this piece. It's very kind of interesting. Traditional methods are used to a certain kind of solutions in medicine. Now we're seeing software play such a huge piece. Mm-hmm. So now it's a piece of code. It's not necessarily a process or a molecule. Somebody's writing a piece of code that's going to tell you what you're going to be prescribed, how it's going to be released. And that means you cannot hang on to older procedures and methodology. Again, like Ron was saying. So that shift is going to happen, and we're going to see more of that.
So, Steve, I want to pull a few keywords and concepts out from this clip and get your thoughts. Okay. Why are we hearing so much about the application of critical thinking these days? Haven't we always employed thoughtful and purposeful decision-making in drug development?
Excellent point. Yeah, it's kind of like when it came up, critical thinking, it's like, yeah, we've always been doing that, haven't we? Same thing with data integrity. It's like, haven't we always had integrity with the data? But the reason is that we were doing a lot of busy work and the quality wasn't necessarily improving. So, and the FDA knows that. That's their whole case for quality initiative. And then from that, computer software assurance, CSA. So all of that's a result of recognizing the fact that interpreting the regulations and creating these overhead burdensome systems isn't the ideal way. Critical thinking is kind of allowing us to reshift. And just like we said, are they opinions, core beliefs, myths, whatever? Should we really be questioning ourselves to making sure we're doing the right thing? So I think critical thinking should have always been there, but we went off on tangents and thought, oh, if we have a 3-foot stack of paper, then therefore it's really good. And that's not true. What's good is to think critically, risk-based, and make your decisions and processes focused on that, so that is really a good, efficient process. You're eliminating risk and it's efficient. That's much better than, how many binders you have in an archival, or how big the stack of the documentation is, or how many procedures you have in your company that everybody has to train on.
Right. No, and I'm glad you mentioned documentation, because that was something else that I pulled out of this clip. More documentation does not translate into more quality. True, which it sounds like you do agree. But does more testing mean quality? I would argue not necessarily, but let's get your thoughts on that.
I agree with you, right? Same thing. We could test a lot, but back to critical thinking. If I really design my tests with critical thinking in mind, then I'm testing the right things at the right time. If I just do a whole bunch of testing, I've created a lot of administration to keep those test scripts and those protocols and everything up to date. And technology is moving so fast. We talked about that earlier. Yeah. So it's impossible to keep up. So you don't want to have such overhead and a burden that you can't move. You can't be nimble and quick on your feet, because we have to be. So more testing isn't delivering better quality. The right testing is delivering better quality.
So true. So what does it take to become a digitally mature organization, in your opinion? And how do we foster this digital leadership, culture of risk-taking, and digital skills for employees?
Yeah, so that's a lot in there. So how do we become a digitally mature organization? Yeah, let's start there. Yeah. So I know we've talked before, and I boil it down to, there's maturity models and all that stuff. You can look at that. But I boil it down with technology. It's pretty easy, I think, to figure out where you are on the spectrum. Are you reactive? If you're reactive, you're not digitally mature. If you're proactive, you're becoming more mature. If you're predictive, then I would say you're in the mature realm. And then if you're prescriptive, meaning you are seeing a problem before it happens and the technology is figuring out what to do about the problem on how to fix it, that's in the future, right? So we are floating around the proactive and predictive, and hopefully moving in the predictive. So look at your systems. Are you reacting? Are you able to foresee problems? Or do they hit and then all of a sudden you swarm up like bees and try to figure out what the problem is? So reactive, proactive, predictive, prescriptive on the spectrum will kind of tell you where you're at.
I love that. Provides a definite benchmark for organizations, right? They can figure out where they are in that continuum. Right. I have a couple of clips here that we're going to let listeners hear, because they go together.
What are some of the changes from a technological standpoint that are required or that support digital transformation across industries?
Yeah, good question. I think that there are a number of kind of new architectures that have emerged. We've all talked about the cloud, and I do believe that companies do need to embrace the cloud, the level of abstraction and kind of continued value that's delivered by cloud providers is a game changer. I also think that their new emerging architectures, maybe not so new, but have been with us for at least a few years, like streaming data architectures, where we're capturing more data in real time and driving having event-driven capabilities that serve customers. I think there's also the notion of like adopting data lakes and being able to build machine learning models off of expansive sets of data that are captured from all over the company. And coupled with all of that is a higher degree of automation when it comes to the production of software and the governance of models and deployment of models. So I think that those are all kind of table stakes things that you really need to achieve at enterprise scale in order to become truly digital.
I believe part of it is like alluding to also what Paul mentioned with using data lakes and data warehouses, and obviously using the cloud. In some cases, it's beginning with the end in mind, where, again, especially if you intend to use that data for machine learning or again, any other purpose, definitely having a good strategy around architecture and data architecture, especially these days with like a lot of the wearables and like robotic surgery. There is again a significant amount of data that is going to be moving around, and also so again handling that and having good architecture for the infrastructure as well as for the data. I think that becomes like the big challenge. So kind of like you have to begin with the end in mind. Otherwise, again, you can do a lot of work with data lakes and data warehouses just to find that the data is, again, it's there. It's just not in a way that it's easy to consume to then use it like further. So there is a little bit of that goes on.
Great. Would love to just get your thoughts and experience on this, Steve. What are some of the technologies that can support a successful digital transformation?
I believe cloud. The reason for that is it's a common platform, a foundation that you can build your technologies upon. And so that would be something to really take a look at. And most companies now are in the cloud or have their cloud or using a cloud service. So that's Absolutely. The foundation that you lay, right? Then
we've kind of perfected that during COVID too, haven't we?
I'm glad you brought that up because, the cloud, I don't think we would have been able to sustain if it weren't for the cloud computing.
Agreed.
You're exactly right. And the other thing it gives you is, I think, business continuity and disaster recovery, which was always a challenge before with on-premise servers. And now cloud technology, failover, all that redundancy, all of that pretty much delivers that. So I got off on a tangent there. And so some of the technologies for digital transformation, to be upfront, I work for a company and we do validation. So all the caveats out there, but I believe validation is important. And I'll back it up with this general industry averages that every project, about 20% goes to validation. And if you can make efficiencies there, you're making efficiencies on every project. That means facilities, equipment, instruments, computer systems, everything has to be validated, right?
Right.
And so that's a big piece of it. And then you've got obviously your SAP type systems, your supply chain, but then moving forward, embracing things. This is a little bit more advanced, but it's coming more quickly. Embracing things like Internet of Things, IoT. And why is that important? If you start automating and embracing Pharma 4.0 and automating your factories, basically, then deploying Internet of Things will allow you to kind of keep up with technology as best you can, but these devices are going to start talking to each other. And that moves you into the predictive and prescriptive, meaning upstream, a blender breaks and that device tells another device down, further downstream, the blender broke, so it's not going to be delivered on time or whatever. That's where we're headed, all these things. So you have to lay the foundation with the cloud. You have to look at where all of your effort is really going, and then finding out where I could implement technology. I want to circle back to culture really quick. When you when you change culture, you're going to have friction, and a little bit is good. And if it's not working, if your culture model isn't working in a specific area, that's good too, because it tells you got to take a look at your culture change strategy and figure out how to tweak it and evolve it. So the same thing true is with the systems. When I'm looking at where are the inefficiencies in my organization, and then look at where the difficulties are, that's probably an area where deploying technology is going to fix an existing problem and help you keep pace as best you can.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think, the digital transformation is a continuum. People start at the beginning and they have to move their way forward. And it's not going to be, the pace is not going to be the same for everyone. And it's true with your cultural shift as well, right? It's a continuum, and you have to start at the beginning and support your team. And eventually you'll get where you want to be. From the clips we just shared too, I love the point, begin with the end in mind. What are your thoughts on this, in particular in the industry here?
Yeah, so I think it's good. I mean, it's a good statement, but I would change that statement. Me personally, we already talked, we can't keep up with technology, right? We have to try our best to keep up with technology. So I would just tweak that saying a little bit. I would say, begin with a journey and begin with a destination in mind on a never-ending journey, right?
Yeah, I love it.
So we're going to be going through, it's always going to be changing. We are not going to meet an end. If we met an end, we would have stopped when we got the fax machine. That was revolutionary, right?
Yeah, right.
But we keep going. Yeah, we keep going and going. Copy machine, great. Now we don't want to do paper anymore. So begin with a destination in mind and a never-ending journey.
Thank you. I like that. In this next clip, we're really going to hear more about investing in people and projects.
Capital One has really embraced from the top down the notion that we need to create platforms to unlock value across all of our lines of business, which is a shift from driving just specifically the needs of local groups or lines of business. And I think part of that is investing in the number of people and projects that you need to really create these enterprise capabilities. It's also culturally embracing product thinking and empowering product leaders across many different domains to collectively drive the vision for internal and external platforms. I think along with that, if you kind of make that shift, then you start to build these reusable capabilities. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're really tying still to business value. I think one of the things that we learned through these transitions, like, for example, there's been a significant effort in consolidating the machine learning platforms and tools that exist across many different areas of Capital One. Capital One has always, like from its founding, been based on like an information-based strategy to be very data-driven. So data science and analytics are nothing new at Capital One, but creating a consolidated environment where we can really leverage the goodness that's created across all the different LOBs is something that's really underway. But I think as part of that, you have to pick use cases that are the highest value, that really deliver on the key objectives of the business while you're creating those platforms. So it's not kind of a field of dreams, build it and they will come scenario.
Great. Steve, we hear the speaker talk about making a shift to a consolidated environment and building platforms across all lines of business during the digital transformation. This perspective that we just heard is from outside the life science industry, but does it or can it apply to us here in life sciences as well?
Absolutely. I think we could learn from other industries. The automotive industry is great with robotics
Right.
and augmented reality. Why can't we do that? Maintenance industries are really good with those types of things. We can embrace that. We talked earlier, the finance industry. They are great about artificial intelligence. So if you use your credit card and you fly to Europe or somewhere and do a charge there and it's out of character, or if all of a sudden at 3 a.m. there's all these online charges, you get a notification that something doesn't seem right. That notification is artificial intelligence in action.
Yeah.
So they are already using artificial intelligence to fight against fraud. And our industry, we were talking about it earlier, our industry is slow, but I think our industry should be the best at embracing technology because we're dealing with patients' lives. That's why patient safety is number one. We should put more value in people than we do in money. And we don't do that, right? That's why the finance industry is so sophisticated with technology and we're lagging. So we should shrink that gap a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. Thank you. And this last clip we're going to hear is more about cultural changes and supporting the team.
I can't remember which report that gave the numbers, and I'm also not very good with the understanding the Gen X, Y, Z, which one's which. But they say that that report said we're at a very interesting point where there's a confluence of all three. Mm-hmm. You have one generation that's just now entering the workforce, and they're used to everything digital. That's not alien to them. They're digital natives, if you will want to call them that. And then you have another generation that is coming of age. They're coming into their element. They're ready to be the decision makers. Mm-hmm. And then you have there's a generation that are currently the decision makers who are going to call the shots. And everybody approaches digital transformation through those lens. And so even when you talk about culture, you cannot use one lens or one filter or one measure and have one common plan to make the culture shift happen. It's different. And there was this other very interesting quote by Kofi Annan, the former secretary of UN, where he said, "You are never too young to lead." And so that would be the workforce that are the digital natives. They may not be too young to lead. And then the same token, he also said, you're never too old to learn. So there are others there further down that may have to do a learning. Mm-hmm. And the kicker is, it's not only just learning, the challenge also lies in unlearning what you've been doing for ages now. And sometimes that's so ingrained, it's part of your DNA. Now, saying that you need to get into a digital DNA means you're going to unlearn what you've learned over time. And that could be one of the biggest challenges here when you talk about culture changes and how it also spans the different kind of profile you have for all the different talent that comprises your workforce.
So, Steve, how do you feel about this idea of not having one lens or one plan in digital transformation?
I don't think that there is one plan. There are different angles. We talked about supply chain, paperless validation, Internet of Things, factory automation. So there are different pieces of the puzzle that are moving together. Infrastructure, cloud infrastructure. So you have to look at it in different ways, but you should look at it as far as how will these things come together and be compatible. Now, I'm not talking about integration because I think integration, people think with integration, we magically take this piece of the puzzle and put it together with that piece of the puzzle. But what integration in our world does is actually create another puzzle piece that sits in the middle and connects the two. And so you have to be aware of that in order to think ahead. But these systems should have protocols and follow industry standards, and you should work with business partners who have been around and have established themselves, because there are great brand new ideas all of the time, but will they sustain? You can't afford to put your data and your investment and train your people in a technology that hasn't been proven. So it may be fancy, it may be a great widget, but be careful about that approach. It may be good and you may want to take that. It's up to the company, but just be careful with that approach. So.
Yeah, be careful with your vetting, right? Make sure you do your due diligence there.
Right.
And we talked about different perspectives too. And of course, when we're expecting a shift or a cultural shift, we do have to keep in mind all of the different perspectives that are there within our teams. We've got the seasoned professionals, and we've got the younger kids coming to us with all these technological backgrounds right out of school, but maybe with not as much industry experience as you mentioned earlier. So can we find a balance, fostering emerging leaders while really teaching and leveraging seasoned employees?
Yeah, again, we kind of talked about the new workforce is digitally savvy, and they expect those tools. You're archaic if you don't have them. They don't want to work with you if you don't have them, right?
Yeah, and we are losing a lot of our talent to some of the other industries that are, much more technologically advanced than pharma, and that is, in my mind, a huge negative for us as an industry.
I agree 100%.
Yeah,
we got to do something. I believe you're right on spot there, and we need to do something to attract talent, right? So that's the younger generation. With the more seasoned folks, again, it's just opening up and listening more than talking. Don't make up these edicts in a nice boardroom and then throw them out and expect everybody's going to do them, because our world is different. Right. Even the younger generation doesn't work like the generations did at the beginning of the 1900s. You worked all day and 7 days a week, and we don't accept that now. So the world is changing. A new workforce is coming in. At the same time, there are people that have been in industry for a long time, and technology could be scary. Mm-hmm. Fear I'm going to be replaced or outdated. And so there has to be sensitivity there, because those folks have a tremendous amount of tribal knowledge that they had to have because you didn't have technology. So they have the experience going back and the domain expertise and knowledge of how things were. And if you get inspected, you're probably going to be inspected about something that happened 5 or 10 years ago, right? Or maybe it's a recent, but you need those folks around as well. So there's different levels and different age groups, all that working together. And I think being sensitive, and like you said, the lenses are important. See from the other person's point of view, and it may change your point of view.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love it. Well, this has been a fun discussion, and I really like that we were able to highlight some of the concepts that maybe our listeners weren't, part of if they did not attend CSV. So I appreciate your time today, Steve. And as we wrap up here, I just want to see if you have any last thoughts on this session that was delivered at CSV or the comments you provided here.
So I remember there was one question that had 3 parts, and I didn't address the other 2 parts, which finally came to mind. See, I'm a more seasoned person, and it takes me a minute. So the other aspects were risk and skills, right? So yes. I just want to say with risk cannot be underrated. Risk is so important, not only to avoid risk, but risk and critical thinking will help you focus on the true high risk areas and not waste time on other stuff. So you got to address high risk, no question about it. Medium, you've got to figure it out. So then when you get to low risk, then do you really need to do anything with it? If it's really low risk, there's not going to be an impact, right? Exactly. And so the seasoned top-level people can make those risk-based decisions and commit and accept the risk, and then listening to the others, communicating what they think the real risks are and guide them on what real risks are. Just another example, documentation errors, right? And so a project will get stopped because of documentation errors. Were those really important errors? Is it okay to let some documentation errors go through so that the project doesn't get delayed? It doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe sometimes it's important to do it.
Right.
But the chance of a documentation error becoming critical is low, but you could stop a project or halt something from getting produced. So you really have to look at risk, and then testing, don't over-test, critical thinking on the testing. And then finally with the skills, to help get rid of the fear of advancing in technology, it's bringing new skills. So I can have two different approaches. I could be afraid that a robot's going to take over my job, or AI is going to take over my job. Or I could learn about these technologies because people who understand robotics and AI and the new technologies, whatever they are in high demand. And so it's a great opportunity to see the new technologies, not run away in fear, but figure out how you can embrace that and apply it into whatever your area of expertise is. So that's a skill that the employees can develop.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Great way to wrap us up, Steve. I really appreciate it. And I want to reiterate, this panel discussion, or the pieces that we're sharing here, is just a snapshot in time and reflects only a limited view of the topic. All panelist opinions, and you as our guest, are really their own and offered here to provide a jumping off point for future discussion. So I'd like to thank you today, Steve, for being our guest. It's really been fun chatting with you, and I do appreciate you sharing your expertise and weighing in on the digital transformation discussion.
Always fun. Thank you.
Thanks. Also, a big shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen, for all his time in editing these sessions. And lastly, thank you to you, our valued listeners. We want to hear your thoughts and questions on this topic. Help us continue the discussion by sharing this with your online networks. Also, please remember to subscribe in your podcast player of choice so you never miss an episode. This week, we are offering an exclusive download of the entire digital transformation session free for our listeners. Simply visit www.ivtnetwork.com/podcast to download and listen. Please email your questions and comments to customerservice@ivtnetwork.com. And we'll be back again next week with another thought-provoking episode. Until then, make it a great week.